Okay, so it is with great pleasure that I open this discussion on the parliamentary oversight on anti-corruption. This project is a very dear project to us as a team at the IDSS, and today with the regional outlook, we go back to where we started. Originally, we were exploring political clientelism, and when we reached to conclusions, we wanted to avoid providing the most obvious one, that political will is needed to address this particular challenge. This is an easy way out in writing about policy. You're never wrong that political will is needed, but you also fail to provide a roadmap towards political will. One road towards political will is elections, where voters can punish insincere or failed attempts at tackling corruption, ultimately with a long-term selection process, arriving at a generation where majority of politicians with leverage are on the anti-corruption side. The other road is an incentive structure within parliaments where the oversight role provides an environment where checks and balances contribute to more efficient anti-corruption institutions. Both roads are not mutually exclusive. But the second road is frequently neglected. The opposition and the majority does not look at the oversight capacity of national parliaments as a useful forum to put legitimate political pressure against the executive, the government, regulators, independent bodies, and the judiciary. The oversight role is typically formal, and in the rare occasions where MPs question the work of the institutions, it focuses only on particular controversy, without drawing systemic lessons on challenges and setting practical tasks and benchmarks to these institutions. So we took this task to work with the MPs of North Macedonia and their assistants in efforts to promote the oversight capacity in the area of anti-corruption. But by doing so, we not only contribute to MPs putting other institutions accountable. Parliaments are forums for conflict resolution. If they are effective, they make political competition a level playing field and incentivize participation by all actors. If they are ineffective in an unequal level playing field, political actors will find other means to resolve conflicts. So in this setup, we wanted to find out what are the regional practices and present this to the Macedonian audience. So we are very grateful to the National Endowment for Democracy who like the idea and are supporting us in these dialogues between various stakeholders, MPs, independent bodies, executive and civil society. We spent this past year and we will spend the next 12 months talking with MPs as civil society and with other organizations from civil society and trying to promote and participate in dialogue between various stakeholders in dialogues related to their oversight capacity, but also a dialogue between independent bodies, prosecution, civil society and MPs on policy making, on future steps, on the reform agenda under the European accession process. Typically in anti-corruption. So we are very excited to commence this next 12 months. But before this, we want to hear from our colleagues from the region. Ana Đurnić from Institute Alternativa Montenegro, and she will talk about the situation in Montenegro on parliamentary oversight. Then Besiana Kuci from Institute for Democracy and Mediation from Albania. Daniela Mineva from the Center for the Study of Democracy from Bulgaria. Luka Glušac from the University of Belgrade. And at the end, Uglješa Vukovic from the Transparency International Bosnia and Herzegovina. All these participants are currently working in the area of anti-corruption, partly through CELDI or through other means. CELDI is a regional network of CSOs and think tanks against corruption. And without further ado, I will ask Anna to have her 10 minutes explaining the situation in Montenegro. In the meantime, if you have questions, feel free to post them in the chat, and I will log them and ask at the end after all the participants complete their presentations. Anna, the floor is yours. We are very excited to hear from you also on what happened yesterday, if you have a minute or two to spare on this as well.
Thank you, Misha. Hello, everyone on my behalf from very, very warm Podgorica, but already today a little bit refreshing due to yesterday's results on the parliamentary elections, which we had yesterday. I would start by saying that as it seems now, and the State Electoral Commission has published preliminary results based on the 100% of the votes, it seems like finally after 30 years we will have the change of the government in Montenegro. And I think that's the key precondition and the key pillar towards democracy, towards building democracy in Montenegro, which was, I could easily say, fake until now, and we will see how everything will work from now on. It's a very tight result. It's not very, very clear and very strong win of the oppositional parties, but as it seems now, they could form a government among three key oppositional leading coalitions. And what was very surprising and very good news after we have heard the first results last night, all of the three oppositional parties also said they are very willing to form a coalition with the minority parties as well, which used to be traditional coalitional parties, partners of the Democratic Party of Socialists. So now we are waiting to see how they will form the government, whether they will stick to the promises they made during the election campaign. One of the key was to form an expert government. All of the three oppositional coalitions said last night, their representatives said that they will not be pursuing ministry chairs, let's say, so that they are willing to form an expert government, which is, I think, a key pillar of their electoral program, which they promoted during this 1 month and a half, let's say, electoral campaign. Very short, but I could say effective, let's say so. So that's the news. We are looking forward to see what these three oppositional parties and coalitions will do, how they will manage to, because they do still have some differences, strong differences among themselves. They showed during the election campaign that they didn't go against each other. They focused on proposing their solutions and towards also criticizing the actual government, which we have now. So we will see whether they will keep these peaceful, let's say so, relations among themselves during the next 19 days, which they have to form the government. I'm really in 2 or 3 months, but everything is yet to be seen, because I said, as the results told us now, it is really, really tight result and the tight win of the oppositional parties. If there are any questions in regard to this, I would be happy to answer, but now I would go further talking about the paper I prepared. I have to explain at the very beginning why I have focused on the anti-corruption agency, Parliament's attitude and behavior towards this. We still say new institution, but it's not very new now. We have it for 4 years now, and it has its roots already very strong on the ground. So we should stop saying new when we talk about this agency, but we had, let's say, a synchronized time period for this mandate of the Parliament and the establishment of the anti-corruption agency, and I thought it would be good to see how the parliamentary oversight functions towards one, at least namely independent institution. And the research showed that the Parliament's attitude and also legislation is very weak and say, let's say, vague towards the independent institutions. We have very precisely developed parliamentary control mechanisms towards the government, but these independent institutions such as anti-corruption agency, but also agency for personal data protection and freedom of information and many others are not very clear, let's say so, in this state of play and functioning of the control mechanisms of the Parliament. There is a strong opinion on my behalf that the control mechanisms have never been functioning worse than during this Parliament's mandate, so in the last 4 years. Although we do have control mechanisms in place, they are not further developed through neither the law on the Parliament nor the law on the government, and there is no enough room to position their control mechanisms towards the independence agencies and institutions as well. Also, we have a situation, and that's why I'm really excited about yesterday's results, that the Parliament for the long time now is functioning as a voting machine for the government, and such strong government support in the Parliament is leading to control mechanisms staying more or less on the paper. We do have very, very exhausting discussions in the Parliament during the control hearings, consultative hearings, Premier's hour, and parliamentary question, but the effect of these lengthy discussions, which almost always end up being political debates instead of focusing on the real results, remain ineffective. When it comes concretely to the Agency of Prevention of Corruption, for prevention of corruption, the research showed that there is no very much of a willingness in the Parliament as it is now to focus on what the agency is doing, despite of all the international community's remarks on how the agency is not being independent and how it is being very strongly tied to the government, in spite of also civil society, domestic civil society, accusing the agency for wasting the money, basically, and not doing anything because of the very, very close family connections of the former director of the Agency for Prevention of Corruption and the Prime Minister. The Parliament always seemed very satisfied with its work. When it comes concretely to the mechanisms we have in the Parliament, for example, only one parliamentary question ever in the last 4 years was actually dealing with the agency and its work. The Parliament is doing only the minimum of its legal obligations coming from the law on prevention of corruption towards the agency. They are solely focused on discussing the agency's annual performance reports once a year and appointing or dismissing the members of the council of the agency. The Parliament and the MPs have been very, very involved actors in the several dismissals of the text. It was misused as a political tool to remove the persons who are being critical towards the government from the bodies of the Agency for Prevention of Corruption. So everything remains solely at the legal minimum. For example, the agency is preparing quarterly reports on its work ever since it's been established, but the Parliament never requested those reports. Also, although they they are being publicly published on the agency's website. They never discussed these reports. They never deliberated these reports. Even the committees never dealt with the quarter or at least semi-annual work of the Anti-Corruption Agency. When it comes to the Anti-Corruption Committee, which is a lead committee dealing with the anti-corruption and particularly the Anti-Corruption Agency, although they have always been dealing since its establishment in 2012, they have been always dealing with many sorts of anti-corruption issues, but they have never been a lead committee in any of those issues. And finally, with the adoption of the law on prevention of corruption, they obtained a concrete jurisdictions towards these agencies' work, and they have been positioned, or they positioned themselves as a lead committee in at least one issue and at least one institution, but it turned out to be very ineffective. From the aspect of the current Parliament's mandate in the last 4 years, they had only 4 consultative hearings and 0 control hearings. And these consultative hearings ended either without any conclusion or with some very basic conclusion that everything is well and the agency is doing a great job, although the general public, domestic public, but international public as well, has always been dissatisfied with the agency's work. So now to come to an end, I think that these wind of changes, I think, will try to make a difference, or should try to make a difference in the future, particularly because in July the Council appointed the new director of the Agency for Prevention of Corruption. So we will have new people on one side in the Parliament, new person leading the agency. And I think also I would not give up on the democratic parties of socialists yet, because at the local level they showed recently that they can be a good opposition, that they do have capacities to research, to dig in, to control the leading or the ruling party or the coalition at the local level. So I am also counting on them to use those capacities also to be a good opposition in the Parliament if these so far oppositional coalitions manage to form the government and the majority in the Parliament. So I think the winds of changes are blowing, and I am really hoping that this will be that this will have very decisive effect, let's say so, also on the position of the agency and its change of its type of work or type of management. So far they have been pretty much lazy and pretty much casual, meaning we will do what the law says, but nothing more and nothing less. We will not be proactive. And the Parliament was doing the same. So now with these changes, things could change, but the general conclusion, I think, is that as this research showed, there is no clear path or a clear procedure or type of behavior of the parliaments toward the independent agencies and how to control them. And I think in this context, in this topic, that this should be something that the new parliament should deal with, whoever is the majority there. I think it's the obligation both for the ruling coalition and the opposition, whoever it is. And I think that they should start by adopting the law on the parliament and the government, and then find space also to strengthen the parliamentary control mechanisms towards independent institutions as well. That's shortly, I hope so. Misha is not looking angry. So I hope the time management was well, my time management was well, and I'm more than happy to answer all your questions, either regarding to the yesterday's elections or the topic of the paper and the parliamentary oversight. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. My angry face is my usual face, but your timekeeping is stellar, so thank you again. And thank you for giving good insights about the current political situation in Montenegro, but also what we are today talking, and that is the parliamentary oversight. Thank you again, and now, Besiana, the floor is yours for sharing what is going on in Tirana regarding parliamentary oversight.
Sorry, I hope now you can hear me. Okay. Hello, everyone. I will start briefly just to introduce what is the basis of my, let's say, research work on the topic of parliamentary oversight in anti-corruption. I've based my, let's say, analysis on the parliamentary oversight capacity index indicators developed by Stappenhurst and some other authors. They have been working for many years now in this area, specifically the role of parliament and parliamentary oversight, specifically on anti-corruption. It provides a good framework for deeper, let's say, research. I've just tried to, for myself, to provide, let's say, let's say, more regulated focus on the issues, and not only dealing with independent institutions, as I will outline in my presentation. We don't have an independent, let's say, anti-corruption agency, but these competences or tasks of anti-corruption are spread among some institutions, not just one of them. That's why I decided to elaborate a bit on the context here in Albania, the political climate that directly affects also the parliamentary oversight, effectiveness of parliamentary oversight mechanisms. Just briefly, as of March 2019, the opposition parties relinquished their mandates, parliamentary mandates. So more than half of these mandates were reassigned by the Central Election Commission to the, let's say, candidates in the list of the opposition parties. Now the configuration of the parliament is like 122 MPs out of 140. So basically the parliament can fulfill its activity with the numbers it has, but in quality terms, it's very debatable, its role now. We have an extra parliamentary opposition now that works. Like its opposition is carried out outside the parliament, whereas the let's say parliamentary opposition is of course not legitimate as it should be, or as the principles of parliamentary democracy require. The new configuration also has hampered these oversight mechanisms of the parliament towards anti-corruption. Many important laws has passed without an adequate debate, or at least the needed focus. For example, we have like the appointment of the High State Audit Inspector that has passed with a simple procedure without any substantial debate. That goes for other important laws and reforms as well. Let's say the amendments in the law for declaration of assets and conflict of interest, and many other, let's say, sensitive laws towards anti-corruption. These extreme measures taken by the opposition, like the former parliamentary opposition, showed that a strong executive branch does not allow for effective, let's say, parliamentary activity and parliamentary oversight. So we had some amendments of the Constitution in 2008 that allowed for more space for the prime ministers to, let's say, control the parliament by the means of confidence vote, also by allowing a simple majority to elect the president of Albania, which also means that we have a an institution that is not really contributing towards checks and balances in the system as a whole. Prevalence and this disruption of checks and balances in the system contributed to this dominance of the majority, let's say the executive, and the limiting of the mandate to control and oversee the government. So this has also created a situation where allegations, corruption allegations exposed by the opposition are often viewed in the lenses of the political parties' debates or as an attack to individual MPs. One other important issue that I want to tackle is the public trust. Maybe it's the case in other countries as well, but in Albania, the parliament and political parties especially are the least trusted institutions in the country. So this creates a bit the lack of legitimacy and the lack of confidence in this oversight or parliamentary activity in general towards anti-corruption. Also, accountability is also not seen as a task that is carried effectively by the parliament. Whereas external independent institutions such as the state audit institution, in this case, the citizens perceive the later more an institutions that would hold into account the government more than the parliament. Also, in terms of the mechanisms in place, I don't want to go like deep in all of the mechanisms foreseen in the rules of procedure of the parliament, but let's say that questions or requests for information and the committee hearings are the most used ones in the activity of the parliament, whereas the other, let's say, mechanisms are underused or not used at all. With regard to the hearings, which are like sometimes considered as important mechanisms, not only for the opposition, but for the public as well, to have some proper feedback on certain issues from the government representatives. One of the issues raised from experts and former MPs was that the committee hearings and the other oversight mechanisms foreseen by the legal framework are not, let's say, binding towards the government representatives. Let's say if a minister does not show up in a committee hearing, nothing happens. No measure is taken. Or if an MP requests information, official data towards a government agency, and the institution that does not provide that information, nothing happens. So no measure is taken to, let's say, ensure that these mechanisms are binding and are really working for the effective parliamentary oversight. One of the most, let's say, active standing committees that deals with anti-corruption are the Committee on Legal Issues, Public Administration and Human Rights, and Committee on Economy and Finances. Very crucial with legislative amendments and reviewing, also with budgetary oversight. But it's always considered as a formal process, not a thorough one. That's why the reports of external oversight institutions such as the State Audit Institution and the High Inspectorate on Declaration of Assets are providing information on their performance on an annual basis, but no discussion on specific issues related to their mandate or to cases that have been exposed are not tackled in the parliamentary, let's say, sessions or activities of the standing commissions. One of the latest reports of the state audit was pointing out as red flags the public-private partnerships by the government. So no further discussion was developed in the parliament on this regard. Whereas for the High Inspectorate on Declaration of Assets and Conflict of Interest, which plays an important role on our judiciary reform, basically this institution provides all the documents on the assets of high officials in Albania, including judges and prosecutors as well. Has always been praised for its work, whereas the cases that they have, let's say, identified have not been an issue for the parliamentary sessions or for the committee hearings as well. Additionally, we don't have, as I said in the beginning, we don't have a specific independent agency dealing with anti-corruption, but with, let's say, judicial reform, we now have a special prosecution office dealing with corruption and organized crime, and a special court that will deal with high corruption level cases. Therefore, these two new, let's say, institutions will somehow cover this extra, let's say, gap that was created in this area, and will also, let's say, tackle the issue of punishing the cases of high-level corruption in the prosecuting and punishing the high-level corruption cases. One of the last things that I want to tackle here is regarding the independent oversight institutions, is the ability that each of these institutions can, let's say, feed in information to the parliament on important cases of corruption, but it also is up to the parliament to take further these feedback, these evidences, to maybe to file cases to the prosecution, also to promote like a healthy environment for the strengthening of the independent institutions, not just providing budgets for their activity, but also having, let's say, a hand in facilitating interinstitutional cooperation. Let's say for this High Inspectorate on Declaration of Assets and Conflict of Interest, the cooperation with other law enforcement agencies is crucial in tackling corruption cases. But if it lacks, it's like always one other, let's say, mechanism such as the parliament can be there and can push forward towards this cooperation that sometimes is lacking and sometimes is not producing results. Or is producing weak results. For the state audit institution, the reality at the moment is that the public administration does not respond to its recommendations. So there is an issue that the parliament requires the independent institutions to implement recommendations that were given by the parliament, issued by the parliament. On the other side, the institutions themselves cannot enforce their recommendations towards the public sector institutions or the government in our case. Basically, that is an overview of the parliamentary oversight mechanisms in Albania, and maybe later on we can tackle the role of civil society as well. So I will end here my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Besa, for giving us an overview of what's going on in the Parliament of Albania. Next is Daniela Mineva from the Center for the Study of Democracy from Sofia. An organization which works with the Institute for Democracy for quite some time within the CELDI network. please, Daniela, can you share with us what are the findings of the parliamentary role in oversight in the Parliament of Bulgaria?
Of course, hello from sunny Sofia. The situation is in Bulgaria is, in very general terms, is similar to Montenegro and Albania, although we have some country specifics that I like to point out. First of all, we have all the institutional setup to deal with anti-corruption. We have a very powerful, in legal terms, Commission for Combating Corruption and Confiscation of Illegally Acquired Property. We have specialized prosecution, State Agency for National Security. At the Parliament, we have a special Commission for Combating Corruption and Conflict of Interest and Parliamentary Ethics, which is composed of MPs. At the Council of Ministers, we have National Council of Anti-Corruption Policies, and the main anti-corruption body, the Commission for Combating Corruption, it really cooperates with the police, with the prosecution. They do joint activities, investigations, arrests. So all the institutional setup is existing. However, this doesn't mean that there are actual results and implementation of rule of law in practice. What happens is, what we observe is a very formalistic approach to anti-corruption, which just looks good to Brussels, but it doesn't encompass all the state capture and corruption crimes in the country. And for that reason, we have been having anti-corruption protests for 54 days already today, ongoing protests in Bulgaria. And basically the people demand the resignation of the Prime Minister and the Prosecutor General. Also, this approach to anti-corruption is not systematic. And there have been a lot of allegations that when there is some arrests or investigations, they're not on random principle, but they're directed towards, let's say, the opposition or the business competitors of some politically connected company. Now I'd like to provide you some more practical examples how the system works in Bulgaria. First of all, similar to Montenegro, in the National Assembly, we talk about anti-corruption only when the National Assembly approves the annual report of this anti-corruption commission. And recently, the annual report for last year was approved without much discussion. Although in this report, the main findings are that there were only 14 fines for conflict of interest based on overview 166 signals, which obviously 14 fines for conflict of interest are not all the cases in Bulgaria. There are 3 out of 40 examined cases and that resulted in convictions for corruption, but no prison sentences. There were 4 million euro of confiscated illegal assets, and 18 out of 79 draft laws received commentary for changes to avoid corruption risks. So this is in short the work of this powerful Commission for Combating Corruption. During the discussion at the Parliament, when the annual report was approved, during this, let's say, short discussion, the opposition objected to this lack of efficiency and also mentioned that the largest corruption scandals we have had in recent years, the so-called apartment gate scandal, was not mentioned in the report. although this scandal resulted in a lot of very high-level politicians resigning their posts. But the members of the commission noted that they lack human resources, because in general they must have 54 work positions, but 25 are free at the moment. So due to this lack of human resources, they could not perform better. Another example I want to provide is an example of the general attitude towards anti-corruption measures. Recently, the Justice Minister and another MP suggested changes in the draft law on this same anti-corruption commission. The changes were not accepted, but the nature of the changes was very surprising to all the civil society representatives. First, they wanted to abolish the obligation of municipal councils to submit declarations of assets. Then they wanted to increase the threshold for income received outside of public service from 500 to 2,500 euro. And for checks to be performed only if the asset declarations show discrepancy of 5,000 euro instead of the current 2,500. So basically, they wanted to legalize the small corruption, let's say. As previously noted by the presentations we heard from Albania and Montenegro, during the National Assembly meetings and hearings, there is possibility for MPs to ask questions on the corruption topic. And I did some research on the website of the National Assembly. There is a search engine which by keyword, which basically shows that for the last 5.5 years, only 14 questions were asked with the keyword corruption. I hope this means that the search engine is not functioning properly, but I'm doubtful that this is the case. So out of these 14 questions, the majority were posed by the opposition. 4 of them were not answered as they're against the rules of the National Assembly. The 10 that were answered were very, very general and related, let's say, to the Greco and CVM recommendations, the independence of judiciary and anti-corruption bodies, their capacity, etc. The 4 questions that were actually not answered were the concrete questions that related to actual cases of corruption. For example, the scandals with the executive agency Automobile Authority, which is the agency that provides driving licenses. And there was a big scandal that anyone can buy a driving license, or the scandals with the fund distributions at the National Science Fund. Another mechanism that we have, and that is a big untapped potential at the Parliament that could be used by MPs, is the Parliamentary Commission for Combating Corruption and Conflict of Interest and Parliamentary Ethics. It meets every 3 months to discuss the results and the efficiency of the Anti-Corruption Commission. However, if you read the shorthand from these meetings, all the meetings are held in very formalistic way. Basically, 90% of the time, the anti-corruption body presents their activity, and at the end, the MPs provide some quick formal feedback, but without actual pressure for more efficiency. Now, this could be due to the fact that this anti-corruption body, the Commission, is elected with simple majority, which means by the ruling party. mostly. And it's natural that this body will not investigate the MPs that have elected its members, of course. But it could also be due to this human resource issue that I mentioned. And last, I want to quickly conclude with the role of the prosecution. In Bulgaria, for some time, we have had this public debate of the lack of accountability of the Prosecutor General, and this is the reason why the currently ongoing protests on the street demand his resignation. And we have the so-called big three persons in the judiciary system. This is the chairman of the Supreme Court of Cassation, the chairman of the Supreme Audit Court, and the Prosecutor General. The civil society suggests that his powers are limited and that we need a separate independent body to prosecute high-level corruption, which is independent from the Prosecutor General, but these suggestions by the civil society are still not undertaken aboard. At the same time, formally, we have a Supreme Judicial Council, which is mandated to ensure the judicial independence, and it has two chambers, judicial and prosecutorial chamber. But basically, at least half of the members of both chambers are elected by the members of parliament, which again means that the Supreme Judicial Council is at least 50% politically dependent. And again, this hinders the real checks and balances between the three branches of power which are needed in each democracy. So with that, I like to conclude my presentation, and we'll be glad to discuss the role of the civil society and any possible next steps to improve this situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniela, very much for giving us knowledge about what is the Bulgarian situation. Now I will invite Luka Glušac from Serbia to give us the insights on the parliamentary oversight capacity of the Serbian parliament in the area of anti-corruption.
Thank you very much, Misha, and thank you for your kind invitation to contribute to this interesting project. So in Serbia, actually, the Agency for Prevention of Corruption was founded by the new law on prevention of corruption in May last year. But actually, the APC is just a legal successor of the anti-corruption agency created in 2008. And besides the APC, other anti-corruption bodies include the government's anti-corruption council and the prosecutor's office for organized crime. So the institutional setup is quite similar to Montenegro. And out of those different anti-corruption bodies, the Serbian parliament has the most direct and comprehensive relations with the APC, so with the Agency for Prevention of Corruption. So to demonstrate how this engagement plays out in practice, I will concentrate on three practical dimensions of their interaction. So selection appointment process of the APC leadership, consideration follow-up to their reports, and finding allocation of the APC's budget. And as I said, I'll be focusing on practical measures that can improve Parliament's oversight role over the anti-corruption agency. And as Misha emphasized in the opening statement, I'm taking political will as an underlying precondition for this engagement. So the agency governing bodies are the council, previously known as the board, and the director. The interesting development with the new law is that the law shifted the balance of relations between the council and directors in directors' favor, who has now much stronger position than before, while the remit of the council has been severely limited. On the other hand, it is commendable that the parliament opted to introduce public competition for both the council and the director with the new law. However, while doing that, the parliament actually seriously demoted its own role in that process, as it only appoints the agency's officials, while the selection procedure is performed by other bodies, that is the Ministry of Justice and the Judicial Academy. And actually, it remains unclear why that task was not delegated to the competent parliamentary committee, for example, given that the agency is accountable directly to the National Assembly. The new law stipulates that the members of the new agency's council have to be appointed actually by tomorrow. So this September the 1st, 2020, that is when the new law enters into force completely. It is now obvious that this deadline will not be respected, as the procedure has not even been initiated due to parliamentary elections that took place in June this year. So with that, the Serbian parliament actually only continues the bad practice established under previous law. In fact, the parliament has hampered the anti-corruption agency's work by long delays in choosing the members of its board, which cause severe problems for agency's decision-making process. For example, between April and I think August 2017, the National Assembly left the anti-corruption agency's board with only 2 out of 9 members because it hesitated to appoint new members. And that obviously caused huge problems in the functioning of the agency, especially because at the same time, it was left without the director of the agency, who was actually in the meantime appointed as a judge of Constitutional Court. Similarly, poor performance in practice is observed when it comes to reporting. Similarly, as in other countries, the anti-corruption agency is obliged to submit the annual report to the parliament. And despite the fact that the legal framework provides for a rather regulated procedure of consideration of agencies' annual reports, in practice, the parliament has usually disregarded those reports. For example, the parliament has failed to discuss agencies' annual reports for 4 consecutive years between 2014 and 2017, even causing the European Commission to argue that such behavior exemplifies the parliament's lack of willingness to ensure effective oversight over the government. A rather promising development has happened last year in 2019 when the parliament did debate the 2018 annual report of the APC. And the newest, the latest annual report for 2019 was submitted during the COVID crisis when the parliament was not in session. So we'll see whether it will be discussed with the new parliament. So it is actually yet to be seen whether this change of the last year's practice will be permanent or it was so to say, a lucky exemption. The former would testify to a true realization that substantive discussion about reports of not only agencies' annual report, but the reports of other independent bodies are essential element of public accountability. The latter would, on the other hand, indicate that there is no sincere change of practice, but only occasional opportune political behavior. When it comes to the third dimension that I focused in my paper, there's a considerably different situation because when talking about budget allocation, the parliament actually performed well when it comes to allocating sufficient funds and increasing the number of employees of the anti-corruption agencies, and the budget was consistently increased in the last few years. So it is vital that this trend continues to enable further development of the agency's capacities. So to sum, out of 3 dimensions of the interaction between parliament and the agency, the parliament scores well only when it comes to budget issues. In other 2 dimensions, meaning the appointment process and the reporting follow-up, the parliament has mostly performed poorly. So what can be done to improve parliament's oversight over the anti-corruption agency? From my point of view, the parliament should amend perhaps its rules of procedure to formally designate parliamentary committee for cooperation with the APC, so in order to establish both strategic and operational cooperation. Secondly, the parliament should be in charge of conducting public competition for agencies' leadership and not only vote on the candidates selected by some other bodies. actually experience that Anna briefly mentioned, the Montenegrin experience here is useful, where the members of the agency's council are selected on the basis of public competition, but which is announced by the competent parliamentary committee. And for that purpose, the parliamentary committee forms a five-member commission composed of one MP from ruling majority, one MP from parliamentary opposition, and then three, let's say, expert members, one from the Judicial Council, from the Prosecutorial Council, and one representative of NGO. So that model maybe can be used in Serbia as well. I'm emphasizing this because the selection appointment process is important, given that the anti-corruption agency is directly accountable to the parliament. So for that reason, there should not be any intermediary body standing between them. This direct relationship enables a real independence of the anti-corruption agency, and the parliament should be the main protector of the agency's independence. As indicated in Serbia, Parliament's declarative support to the APCs has to come to life in practical terms, because the agency's independence is not a privilege established for anyone's comfort, but a requirement and a necessity needed to ensure that anti-corruption policies do not depend on daily politics. So that's for me for opening intervention. I'm happy to answer any question. Thank you.
Thank you, Luka, for this overview of the Serbian case. And lastly, before we go into discussion, please welcome Uglješa Vukovic from Bosnia and Herzegovina, from Transparency International, to give us what's going on in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Uglješa, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Misha. Hello, everyone. Hello from Bosnia. And okay, well, when it comes to Bosnia, before I start talking more on the parliamentary monitoring over the anti-corruption agency in Bosnia, I would like to provide you with more information on the agency itself. So in Bosnia, the anti-corruption agency and its responsibilities are mostly related to the coordination activities. So the agency is mostly involved in the exchange of information with other bodies and coordination of activities between public institutions included in anti-corruption efforts. What is also important to say is that the agency in Bosnia is formed at the state level, because Bosnia is a very complex state with very complex constitutional and institutional setup, which means that this agency is solely responsible for the coordination of activities or for public policy making at the state level. The agency has, as I said, very soft responsibilities. So the only competence given to the agency that could be assessed as more essential or more important is the one related to the protection of persons who report corruption. So the agency is responsible to provide the status of the protected whistleblowers to those persons or to those employees coming again from the state level institutions who report corruption. So this is the only responsibility given to our agency that is not soft and that is more essential when it comes to anti-corruption efforts. Other activities are very soft, as I said, and many critics and many people believe that the agency is not of some particular importance for the prevention of corruption and its punishment in Bosnia. For example, some citizens even mix the agency with an NGO, because the agency is mostly involving itself into organizing public conferences or undertaking awareness-raising activities. However, we do have the committee, the parliamentary committee, whose role is to monitor the work of the agency. And the committee's responsibilities they are divided into two main components. On one side, the parliamentary committee is monitoring the work of the agency, and on the other side, the committee is directly participating in appointment, selection, and dismissal procedure of the agency management. And according to the research that I've done recently, the data available on the official website of the committee show that the committee usually met 4 to 5 times a year, and that the committee is mostly involved into this appointment and dismissal procedure. So the committee is not. The committee is mostly willing to participate in this procedure and to discuss issues related to appointment and dismissal of the agency management, rather than to talk or discuss about some thematic issues related to the work of the agency. There was one moment in 2016 when the committee became the center of the greater interest, greater public interest, because at that point, the committee proposed one person for the position of the deputy director of the agency, and that person had criminal charges against himself filed for corruption and the abuse of the authority. This moment was very striking, and the committee was at that time it was overly criticized, especially by the civil society. The committee, the parliamentary committee in Bosnia was mostly praised for its composition, because the committee is composed of 9 members, and 6 members are coming directly from the parliament, so from both legislative houses. So 6 members of the committee are MPs, and 3 members are coming from the academia and civil society. So this is why the committee was praised for including the representatives of the both academic community and civil society. And this is something that I believe this is, of course, it's good to have members of the academic community and civil society included. But on the other hand, I think that the procedure for selecting the members or the so-called external members of the committee coming from civil society, that this selection procedure should be more transparent and open to the wider public. What is also important to say is that the quorum for the work of the committee consists of 5 members, and all decisions are made by simple majority. And one thing which is not prescribed in the current legislative framework, and in my view it would be desirable to change this, is the requirement to have at least one voice or one member of academic community and civil society within the majority when making decisions, because in this way no MPs could make the decision on their own, and the role of external members in the work of this body would be significantly increased. But as I said at the beginning, in Bosnia, the issue is that the country has a very complex constitutional setup and institutional setup, and in this way, parliamentary monitoring over the agency specialized for anti-corruption fight is also very complex, and the committee basically is willing only to involve itself into appointment and dismissal procedures, because here the role or the responsibilities of the committee are very clearly and explicitly defined in the law on the agency. But so far we haven't seen any thematic sessions of the committee on the work of the agency. So no practice confirms that the agency is willing to broadly discuss specific issues related to the work of the agency. It is true also that the legal framework does not allow the committee to interfere with the agency's day-to-day work. For example, the committee is not allowed to have insights into specific cases on whistleblowers, which is perfectly understandable. But at the same time, it is not good that the committee is not willing to exercise its responsibilities over the work of the agency. So mostly it is limited to appointment and dismissal procedures related to the agency's management. And yeah, that's that in short. What needs to be improved? Well, in my view, what can be easily improved is this change related to the composition of the committee. Or to the quorum for the work of the committee, and also what is good, what would be good to have is also that the session of the committee should be held more often, especially with topics with more specific topics on agenda. Because as I said, now we have only 4 to 5 sessions in a year. And also, according to the data that I found, the last meeting of the committee was in the mid of 2018. So this oversight role is, as Misha said at the beginning, rather formal. And we are still waiting for the committee to be more included. And also what is important in Bosnia is to discuss the role of the agency, because the agency is not involved into investigating or prosecution of corruption-related cases. So we should discuss the role of the agency, especially when it comes to investigating cases, or I don't know, checking of past declarations, or maybe to strengthen the role of the agency with respect to the protection of whistleblowers. So we are still waiting for these changes related to the role of the agency. That is the most pressing issue currently, because as I said, citizens very often mix the agency with an NGO, having in mind its scope. So that's that briefly. Of course, I'm here for your questions and comments.
Yes, thank you, Vyasha, for the presentation. Before going into questions and discussion, I want to just very briefly inform you about what's going on here in North Macedonia. At the beginning of this last decade, the parliament even formally decreased its oversight capacity in several laws and procedures. But this is slowly reversing with new rules of procedure and the new, let's call it like that, initiative by MPs to bring back the oversight role of the parliament. And here there are several projects working on this, which kind of try to help the parliament into regaining its oversight capacity. What the last constitution of the parliament failed is to establish its a highly political role in oversight or checks and balances, if you will, because I think it is very legitimate if parliaments, if MPs try and exert pressure against the government, against independent bodies, if they have arguments to do this, because ultimately the parliament is a political body. What happened in 2017 was that the new constitution of the parliament failed to return the annual report of the previous Anti-Corruption Commission, which, according to all reports, was one of the gatekeepers for corruption. So early on in the constitution of that parliament, the last parliament, it was very important to establish this role of putting pressures to the remnants of state capture, and not only through formal means of oversight, but also quite openly acknowledging that because of the lack of results, some of those persons in the previous Anti-Corruption Commission should resign. This didn't happen. They resigned because of other means, but this was one failure. The other failure of the previous constitution of the parliament was that they left key anti-corruption institutions, such as the agency or then commission for freedom of information, the state auditor, to remain unappointed for quite a long time. So they had, similarly as Luka explained for Serbia, some of those postings were left empty for too long because of different negotiations between majority and opposition. But this was taken out of hand. So this was one important failure. What they did good was that they brought to life a new law on anti-corruption, which redesigned how the Anti-Corruption Commission is appointed. Basically, similar to Montenegro, but also different. Members, MPs from the majority and opposition, together with people from civil society and the ombudsman, they are the commission which makes interviews with potential candidates, and they draw the final list, which is then voted on in the parliament. And these interviews are public. They are recorded, broadcasted, not live, unfortunately. But the effects are that some party favorites were eliminated quite early on in the competition process. And the second is that this parliamentary constitution was quite open to talk with civil society in various capacities, but also in this capacity on trying to establish an oversight hearing, public hearing and oversight hearing. They had public hearing on some of the recommendations of the Anti-Corruption Commission on the presidential elections, but also they were quite open in doing much more comprehensive oversight hearing on anti-corruption, bringing several institutions to report to the parliament. But unfortunately, because of elections called very early, this didn't materialize, but we hope that it will materialize soon with the new composition of the parliament. So this is in very short terms what's going on in North Macedonia. And I want to open a discussion. I already have one question, and this is directed to Anna and Luka, and it concerns whether the parliamentary's position to anti-corruption was augmented by the Euro accession process, or it wasn't. So what would you assess the European accession process to have an effect on, or it doesn't have an effect on the anti-corruption law. And Daniela, if you can jump in and say if now when Bulgaria is a member state, but during the accession process, if there was some movement in this respect.
Should I start?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for the question. There is one thing that I failed to mention during my presentation, and it's the fact that the opposition has been boycotting the parliament most of the time during the last 4 years. As probably most of you already know, it was an on and off boycott. Some of them would join the parliament at some specific moment. The last one was the COVID-19 crisis, which brought the part of the opposition back to the parliament, but there were also some parties, two of those which probably will be forming this ruling coalition in the future based on the yesterday's elections, which never crossed the foot in the parliament during the last 4 years. And this damaged the parliament's control function a lot in all kinds of terms, not concretely only for the control mechanisms, but everything, the legislative function of the parliament as well. Because the parliament for the last 4 years, it looked like either it was very quiet, a voting machine without many discussion, or it was a very crossfire of all kinds of fights between the part of the opposition, which would partly join the parliament session and leading coalition. And that's what the European Commission was focused on. So in most of the reports, or in all of the reports, the non-papers, but also annual reports on Montenegro's progress in the EU accession process, they would mostly focus on the fact that the opposition is boycotting the parliament. They were also focused on changing the electoral legislation. So most of their arguments were about that. They didn't really focus on control mechanisms. They would briefly mention those as well, saying the legislative function, the control function, but particularly they would address the boycott of the opposition and the electoral legislation and changes to the electoral legislation. So yes, I think that if the European Commission's opinion and argument would be stronger in that regard, that it would, let's say, help strengthen the control mechanism of the parliament and its function. But I also believe that the boycott of the opposition did affect the control mechanisms in a negative way. I must say that in the past, even when the opposition was in the parliament all the time, it didn't affect much of the, I must say, effectiveness of the control mechanism. So the epilogue of the control consultative hearing, premier hours, it was the same as it is now. Either there was no conclusion or soft conclusions, or recommendations which would not be later followed, whether they're being implemented or not. So in that regard, everything was the same, but the public, and particularly the civil society and the media, could hear some arguments and some information which would, in other way, probably never go public. So in a way that in a way of achieving what control mechanisms would achieve, the situation didn't change much due to the boycott. But in terms of what we heard and what we managed to hear and information to find out, the boycott seriously damaged the control mechanism, I think, of the parliament. I hope I answered the question.
Well, as per Serbia, well, actually the ongoing calls and underlying the necessity to improve parliamentary oversight over the executive is one of the permanent features of every Commission's reports regarding Serbia, either annual reports or recently non-papers. Similarly, the Commission has, consistently, emphasized also the necessity, for the Parliament to be more proactive in cooperation with all independent state institutions. So not only anti-corruption agency, but also ombudsman and two commissioners for the protection of equality and data and information commissioner. So, but actually, especially in Serbian case, when there are, larger problems, especially in foreign policy, and that particular situation with Belgrade and Pristina negotiations. So when they're more important for foreign policy issues, then these kind of issues are not under spotlight to sufficient degree, at least according to my opinion. However, the pressures from European Commission have definitely resulted in well, for example, adoption of the law on lobbying, or this actually new law on prevention of corruption from last year. However, in this area, it is still more like a checking game. So when there should be like a new legislation or amendments to legislation, then the authorities perform well. But still, the problem is in implementation. The problem was in the implementation of previous legislation. It will probably be the same case now with the new one. So, to some, definitely the pressures from Brussels are important. They're contributing to a certain degree, but then there are also a limited maneuvering space for Brussels in this sense. Hopefully, the new methodology, accession methodology, with the more emphasis on the rule of law, will also help to streamline better these issues, because the work of independent oversight bodies is actually in the center of the entire rule of law realm in Serbia.
Luca, Daniela.
Yeah, well, I agree with all these conclusions. It's well, from the perspective of EU member states, indeed the European Union can provide the legislation, the directives, the mechanisms. However, it's up to the national government to implement them. And in that regard, well, it's at least good to know that there is some institution that is above you, let's say Brussels, which provide from time to time pressure and direction, because if this doesn't exist, the situation will be even worse. Let's say if there is total failure to establish a rule of law and the corruption thrives, the government will probably just direct the public attention to the migrant crisis or the corona crisis, and the public debate will be steered into another topic, especially if all the media are politically controlled. So yes, it's good to have European legislation. For example, we have this obligation for civil society members to be included in working groups at the parliament, to be invited during hearings, etc. But this doesn't mean that the civil society opinion is taken into consideration when the draft legislation is later adopted. But of course, it's good to know that we can always turn to the European Public Prosecution Office, Europol, Eurojust, the representative of the European Commission. These bodies, also this Article 7 of the Treaty for Establishing the European Union is a mechanism that can stop the voting rights of member states which have which have failed in the rule of law, like Hungary. There are indeed some partial mechanisms, let's say, at the European Union to achieve this. But let's say what happens in the future with the new rule of law mechanism. It's still not finalized, so we have high hopes for it. We have to wait and see.
Thank you. I have before going into the other, there are two people waiting for questions. I have a very short proposal. We were thinking about providing the European accession process, providing some sort of incentive to parliamentary oversight. So, for instance, every parliament in the region has some sort of parliamentary body which oversees anti-corruption. The European Parliament, for instance, or the Commission can ask each of the parliaments to prepare an annual report on anti-corruption developments through series of public and oversight hearings. The opposition has an incentive to participate in this and has an incentive to actually use this forum for pressure, bringing institutions accountable. It also has doesn't have an incentive to make a theater out of this, because then this report will not be considered if it is only a political vehicle. This in turn creates an incentive structure on the executive to perform better. So let's see what happens if this thing comes into being, and I think it will be an important, it can be an important tool by the European Parliament and the Commission to actually not only talk with national parliaments, but make them do something in their actual capacity, because currently we see the European Commission, not only European Commission, but we see that leadership meetings, informal ways of the policy development are favored, and this can have democratic setbacks, and it's very important to actually bring the development process and policy development, but also oversight and accountability mechanisms back to the formal ways of the parliamentary forum. Rezard Mehmet has a question. Rezard, please be brief and if you can be specific on to whom you're posing the question.
Actually, I didn't have a question. I just wanted to provide a very short overview of the situation in North Macedonia, but also to thank the speakers of the overview that they provided on the situation, on the relationship between the parliament and independent institutions. And from what we heard from all the speakers is the general remark, general concern is that there is no effective follow-up on the recommendations and annual reports of independent institutions, including the anti-corruption agencies in the countries. And that is, I think, vital for effective parliamentary oversight, because the parliament, even though has a unique role in overseeing the executive branch, there are also other independent institutions who have a stake in the oversight of the government, including the anti-corruption agencies. And I think that complementary and productive relationship between the parliament and independent institutions is very, very, very crucial to effective parliamentary oversight. And to keep it short, from what I heard from other speakers and judging from the situation in our country, I think that then more efforts should be invested in strengthening this cooperation, not only the formal interaction between the parliament and independent institutions, but also the informal interactions and cooperation between parliaments and independent institutions. Maybe there are no positive examples or good examples in the region, but worldwide there are very, very good examples, good practices of how parliaments nurture relationship with independent institutions and how they capitalize from recommendations and findings of these independent institutions. To conclude, Reinhard Priebe in 2017 assessed the situation regarding this relationship between the parliament and independent institutions in North Macedonia, and his concrete recommendation is to apply the Belgrade principles that apply to the cooperation between the parliament and the ombudsman, which are very, very much applicable for the relationship also between parliament and other independent institutions. Very helpful discussion, very fruitful discussion. I'm very thankful that I'm participating in this, and I'm looking forward to hear other opinions. Thank you, Misha.
Thank you, Rezart. Anna, feel free to ask question or provide a comment. Yes.
Thank you, Misha. First of all, thank you for organizing this and for inviting us to attend this very interesting discussion. And thanks to all panelists who presented their experiences. Just to mention, I work for the National Democratic Institute in North Macedonia, and we were pretty much active in the last 10 years in introduction of the oversight mechanisms in North Macedonia. It's not a question, it's also maybe just a topic for reflection or something to be taken into consideration. I know that today we discussed mainly the oversight of leading bodies in parliament with regard to anti-corruption measures, and maybe the oversight over the independent bodies dealing with anti-corruption. But I think that another very important component is that we need to take into consideration the role of other committees who can exercise oversight, maybe on other areas which are not, how to say, they don't have the title of corruption, maybe they have the title of environment, oversight on how environment measures are implemented, how protection of cultural heritage is conducted in a certain country, but which could hide some topics which can be the source of corruption. So I know that with Montenegro, India in Montenegro and Macedonia developed those control hearings, called in Montenegro control hearings. In our country, those are oversight hearings. But it's very important that, as Misha mentioned, those oversight hearings were not, or they are not taking place at the desirable level in Macedonia. So here we are dealing with not only not having follow-up on measures related to the recommendations from the agencies of anti-corruption, but we don't have any follow-up on recommendations that were adopted from parliament towards governmental institutions with regards to hearings on different areas. And I believe that those areas can be also potential challenges or sources of corruptive behavior, but also of non-ethical or having behavior that is not in line with the integrity principle. So for me, it was very interesting to listen to the Montenegrin experience when Anna said that they don't have any possibilities for ensuring sanctions of public officials who are not appearing at hearings when they are invited or when they are not providing information. I believe that this is the similar cases in all countries that presented their experience. We are also facing the same experience now, as Misha mentioned. There are a lot of projects. We as NDI, and together with the Institute for Democracy, because we are implementing a long-term project, we are working on amending the rules of procedure. And one of the main challenges is this: how to ensure or how to foresee sanctions for not showing up, for not follow up on the measures that were adopted or for not providing any information. So that would be my comment or topic for discussion.
Thank you, Anna. Yes, well, does anybody want to jump in with some comment, or we should go to the role of civil society, because several of you mentioned where do you see the role of civil society in parliamentary oversight. So, Besiana, would you like to provide a short comment on this? Please bear in mind that we have to close at 3. Yes, be
Okay.
short. Yes.
There are not many things to say on this regard. I mean, we actually work on many topics related to the activity of the parliament, and including oversight mechanisms as well. Basically, CSOs do not only have advocacy or advocacy capacities or expertise to offer to the parliament, but they also have valuable information from the grassroots. There are many organizations that work in remote areas, or they work nationally on different topics, and these could provide a good source of information for the parliament with regard to anti-corruption efforts, but also to other topics, as Anna also mentioned in her comment. On the other side, the civil society has also the capacities to offer expertise. We already mentioned different projects being held in our countries, many trainings also carried out. I just want to mention here at IDM, Institute for Democracy and Mediation in Tirana, we have recently been working for the development of integrity plans with the Ministry of Justice. And this is a type of expertise that can be also offered to the parliament in their hearings in the committee, standing committee sessions, or in different aspects as well. So there is a potential there to offer some quality information to the parliamentary oversight. I would just also add the role of investigative media as well. So not only civil society, but the media is also an important actor in this process. And they might also bring up or expose cases, evident cases of corruption, more than civil society can do in this regard. But in our context, I should say for Albania, unfortunately, we have been, let's say, the parliament has been not offering a good environment for the investigative media to develop, especially the online media. We lately, in December, passed a law on defamation package, and also some law that controls the online media. So that's not working towards improvements of parliamentary oversight in anti-corruption. Basically, these are my main points here.
Thank you, Besa. Uglješa, would you like to jump in with your thoughts on civil society's role in parliamentary oversight of anti-corruption?
Well, when it comes to the role of civil society in Bosnia, there are several CSOs actively involved in the monitoring of the work of the agency. But what would be very good for us is, and that would be advisable, is to develop provisions referring to the selection of committee members, parliamentary committee members, from the civil and academic community, in order to secure the transparent election of independent members based on their competencies, merits, and the moral qualifications, because so far there have been some complaints that this selection procedure of members coming from the civil society was not transparent and was not open to the wider public. So to us, it would be very important to open up this procedure for the whole civil society and for as many members as possible. And because, as we said in Bosnia, the composition itself of the committee is quite good, because we have even 3 members coming from the civil society and academia, and 6 MPs on the other hand. And so, as I said, there are a lot of CSOs involved in the monitoring activities, and we do cooperate also closely with the agency, with the anti-corruption agency, especially when it comes to public conferences, roundtables, and even when it comes to training sessions designed for civil servants. But as I said, the role of the agency is reduced to its soft responsibilities, and when it comes to policy making with respect to anti-corruption efforts, the role of some other institutions such as ministries of justice at different levels of governance is much more important, and the role of, for example, ministries such as Ministry for Public Administration even. So the agency is only involved into development of strategic documents such as anti-corruption strategy at the state level and action and the following action plan.
Thank you, Uglješa. Anna, what are your thoughts?
Firstly, to help the government and the parliament to develop law on the parliament and law on the government. I think that's what we need to start with, to begin with. Find best possible solutions to further elaborate the control mechanisms which we already have, but also to develop a new one, particularly, as I said, towards the independent agencies and institutions, which are somewhere in between usually. Then to monitor how those solutions are being implemented, because so far we have been monitoring a lot of the implementation of the control mechanisms, not only towards the anti-corruption, but many others. I would particularly point out the need for control mechanisms towards the budgetary spending. I think the Committee for Finances and Economy and the Budget is one of the key preconditions and one of the key pillars of the parliamentary control mechanisms in regard to budgetary spending. But when you don't have the use of the control mechanisms at all, or if the conclusions of those mechanisms are that everything is great and that there is nothing to be done, then there is very little that civil society can do besides pointing out that it's not, and pointing out that the institution which is being controlled by the parliament, or the person who is being public official who is being controlled by the government, and his work or her work is not well, and to insist on that until the parliament starts seeing, or at least starts looking at it. But when we do have conclusions, as we did have in several occasions, and in several occasions in the past, the Parliament also issued control and consultative hearings based on the particular recommendations and initiatives coming from the civil society. So I think that's really good practice. But when it's understanding of the importance of control mechanisms on both sides, then there is a possibility to do something and to work together. When these control mechanisms turn into political debates, which is a common case in Montenegro, very, very exhaustive and lengthy discussions, which are 90% political and maybe 10% professional, then it's pointless to even monitor the implementation of such mechanisms.
Thank you, Anna. Luca, and we will finish with Daniela's comments.
Thank you, Misha. Well, in Serbia, civil society has been traditionally very interested in contributing to the state's anti-corruption efforts. Both on the advocacy side and watchdog side. For example, when the new law on anti-corruption was adopted last year, the civil society organizations were very active in providing their opinions, recommendations, proposal to draft legislation. However, only I guess smaller parts of their recommendations were ultimately adopted, and still it is a good thing that civil societies are really closely monitoring both the work of the anti-corruption agency, but also Parliament's role as well. I hope in the future actually that the civil society will have a more prominent formal role as in some other countries in the region, either being included in selection committee for anti-corruption agencies, boards or director, or actually being the members of civil society, and because in Serbia we have a really quality individuals with vast experience in anti-corruption efforts, hopefully being appointed as members of the anti-corruption council as well.
Thank you, Luca. Daniela, we will finish with the European Union and your thoughts about what can be done.
Well, I don't want to repeat all the ways that civil society can contribute. It's clear that it has capacity to monitor, suggest changes in legislation, make parallel reports, put pressure on policymakers. But for me, more important question is how this recommendation will be placed into practice and taken into consideration. So this more difficult task, according to me, can be achieved in several ways. First, either the CSOs need to find some really open-minded policymakers or MP with whom to talk to and who can suggest legislation change, let's say, into the National Assembly. So finding the right member of parliament. Another option will be to find again open-minded public institution that has let's say regulatory or anti-corruption functions, and in this institution we can try to improve their internal procedure. As you probably know, in Saudi we have a tool called MACPI, where the civil society do internal audit of the procedures in a single public institution and suggest how it can be improved. And third approach, and let's say it could be the most efficient one sometimes in some countries, is to rely on external pressure. This means to either go to the delegation of the European Commission, if we are talking about non-member states, or to go to some foreign ambassador of another country and ask them to put pressure on the policymakers to stop some corrupt practice. So these are my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniela. I think we can wrap it up. For us, it was a really our team at IDSS. This was a really interesting discussion. For those who are not presenting, you should know that these presentations, prior to these presentations, the presenters prepared policy briefs on these issues, and these will be published at the beginning of September, not tomorrow, but in the first half. We will have, aside from this video, written like policy overview, let's call it like that, which is regional. But we will make note of your recommendations, and as we are working in several ways with the Assembly of North Macedonia, we will try to first implement some of the recommendations there, because at least until now we see some level of commitment from MPs and also from the offices of the parliament to implement various instruments. But I think that concerning parliamentary oversight, or seeing parliaments as one of the central anti-corruption institutions in each country, it necessitates also regional engagement, as kind of setting international benchmarks using EU conditionality. And I think this can be a fruitful field for cooperation between civil society organizations first, but also, more importantly, to push parliaments into cooperation on this issue. I want to thank you again for participation. Thanks to the presenters, authors, but also to people in the audience who were patient enough to attend a almost 2-hour conference online, which is also always kind of difficult. Thank you again, and see you soon in some better times, hopefully live, not through online meetings. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye.